Hey you guys, it's me Crystal. So today I'm going to do a kind of video that I've never done before, and I'll probably never do it again because this probably won't go well. But I had a lot of thoughts about this book and I wanted to talk about it. So I'm going to attempt to do a standalone review of Sea Witch by Sarah Henning. And I'm going to give a quick overview of this book and then we're going to talk about it. So basically, this is being pitched as like a Little Mermaid retelling, but it's essentially a Sea Witch origin story that's like part Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Mermaid, and then a little bit like Disney. But that's basically all you need to know as far as the summary goes for this book is Sea Witch origin story. And I gave this book 3 stars. And I kind of feel like because of the way I typically rate books, that I kind of have no choice but to give this 3 stars. I didn't hate it. I really don't think this is like a 3-star book for me. I think it is more of like a 2-star book, but because I didn't hate it, and since I tend to reserve 2 stars for books that I hated, I'm kind of stuck giving this 3 stars and I don't feel good about it, but whatever. So let's get into what I liked about the book, and then we'll talk about everything else. So what I really liked about the book was basically Evie and Nick, and like that's it. And before I talk more about Evie and Nick, there was like basically this book is like basic narrative, and then there are all these like asides, and so most of the asides are flashbacks. There's a prologue and then there's an epilogue. And then there are like all these other flashbacks from different characters' points of view. And then the closer we get to the present, I think there are like 2 of these kind of asides that are like present day, like happening in the right now. And the last one of these, which is right before we get to the epilogue, I thought that particular scene had some really nice imagery in it. And it was actually even a little exciting as someone who's like, you know, a big Little Mermaid fan. So I don't know if it's because I like, you know, the movie so much and because I like mermaid stuff so much, if I'm just being too hard on this book, or if it's because I've seen this movie, I've seen the Little Mermaid movie so many times and I've read the Hans Christian Andersen story way too many times that I'm just being like extra nitpicky. But anyway, back to Evie. So Evie is our main character. She is our protagonist, and she's like your typical YA protagonist. She's a little bit of an outcast. People don't really like her for whatever reason. And then there's this guy who's like popular, who likes her for whatever reason. You do get the reasons why in the book, but I'm saying it's a very typical YA protagonist. But I still really liked Evie. I thought Evie was very likable. She's a witch and she's a fishmonger's daughter, and so she's poor, and so that's one of the reasons why people don't like her. They don't dislike her for being poor, they dislike her because she's poor. And Nick is her best friend, and Nick is another character that I really liked, and Nick is the crown prince of this place where the story is set. It's a Scandinavian based kingdom, and they feel like because she's poor and he's a prince that they shouldn't be friends, and that she's trying to like rise above her station or whatever. That's why people don't like her. But I still really liked Evie and Nick and their friendship, and I actually thought it was really sweet. And normally when I say something in a book is sweet, I don't usually mean it in a good way, but like this was like sweet in a good way. Like they were, you know, very supportive of each other, and I really liked their friendship, and I really liked them hanging out together. And I think if I liked Evie less, I probably wouldn't have finished the book. But then I probably also wouldn't have disliked it as much either, but then I wouldn't have kept reading. So this is going to be like a spoilery talk, but if I get too spoilery, I will try to put some kind of sign that's somewhere on the screen that says we're going into major spoiler territory in case you don't want any spoilers. But it's not a spoiler to say that 99.99% of this book takes place on land, and I knew that when I bought the book, but I forgot by the time I started reading this book. And I spent the first like 20-30 pages like waiting for her to like go under the sea, and then I realized that wasn't going to happen, and then I was like super disappointed. But anyway, it's just this book is called Sea Witch, and this is a very kind of watery under the sea cover, and I just think it's super misleading when she's literally doesn't go under the water into the epilogue. But yes, outside of that imagery and that last aside before the epilogue, and outside of Evie and Nick, I didn't like anything else in this book. So one of the things I didn't like were all those asides and all of those flashbacks. So one of the problems with this book is if you read the blurb, which is something I probably should have done before I read the book, is that you find out that they lost, Evie and Nick lost their friend, and their friend's name was Anna, and she drowned in the ocean. And then like 4 years later, this girl shows up on land who's clearly a mermaid. Mermaid shows up on land who looks just like Anna. And because she looks so much like Anna, even though she's claiming not to be Anna, Evie decides that she has to help this mermaid capture the heart of this prince that she says she's in love with, and that prince would be Nick, who is Evie's best friend. But the problem I have with these flashbacks is that we don't get to know Anna at all in any of these like little asides. The only time you see her is like when she's like 5, and then again when she's like 11, right before she dies. And I'm just like, I do not care. I do not care about your dead friend. I did not get to know her. And what I don't like that authors do sometimes is like, I am not going to care about this person just because the main character cares about them. Maybe my heart is just cold and walled off and in an ice cavern or something, and it is, but it's just like, I have feelings, I have sympathy for people sometimes, and it's just like, but I'm not going to care, and I'm not the only person who's like this. I'm not going to care about somebody just because the main character cares about them. I'm like, I don't know Anna. I never even see you really with Anna. I see Anna 2 times, and so it's like, I don't get to know this girl at all. She's literally on the screen as Anna for like maybe 2 pages, maybe. And then it's like all of a sudden this girl shows up, and I just didn't care. I did not care at all, like even a little bit. And so it's like, that's a big problem when a huge part of your plot is going to rely on me having sympathy for these people having lost their friend. And I'm like, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be like, oh, I can't imagine. And then like you feel sympathy because you have a heart or whatever. But it's like, no. So speaking of Anna, the person I didn't like was Annette. She is too perfect, so automatically that's a red flag. She's suspicious, right? And then there's Iker, and Iker is Nicholas's cousin, and so they're also friends. And Iker's like super hot, and as soon as he shows up, he's all over Evie. And Evie's like, oh, he's never looked at me like this before. Oh, he's never talked to me like this before. And immediately I'm like, okay, so suspect. He's immediately suspect. Okay? And we don't ever get to see how Iker and Evie were together before, because the flashbacks are super vague, and they're told from like this very kind of not omniscient point of view, but it's a very distant point of view where Evie and Nick and Iker and Anna, they're just called the girl and the prince, and they barely even get names in these flashbacks and these asides or whatever. And so immediately Iker's like, oh, Evie, you're so beautiful, and he's like touching her face and touching their hair, and he's just like all over her. I'm like, okay, suspect. So because I don't get to know Anna, and because Annette is immediately too perfect and suspect, and Iker is already also suspect and perfect, it made the ending of the book like that much more predictable. So not only do you kind of know where the story is going based on the title alone and the fact that the entire story they're on dry land, so you know something has to happen to drive these people, to drive Evie anyway, into the sea. So one of the other big problems I have with this book was the inconsistencies. So there are 2 kind of inconsistencies that I'm talking about. And the first one is inconsistencies with the writing. And so like, for example, like there's a scene where Evie and Iker are like going into the gardens, going into the palace gardens. Okay. I think I was trying to say castle. Anyway. And he has his arm around her waist. She doesn't say he put his arm around her waist. It's just like, she's saying that they go into the garden, and she's like, I can't believe I'm walking through the sunlit gardens hand in hand with Iker. And then later, like 2 paragraphs later or whatever, she says that his arm is around her waist and has been since they were up on the balcony. And I'm like, Is his arm around her waist, or are they holding hands? You know? And there were several places that were like this, where, you know, they're saying that she's sitting down, and then 2 paragraphs later, she moves to sit down. I'm like, honey, she's already sitting down. And okay, look, I'm one of those people that if you ask me to beta read your book, please don't. But if you do, I'm a really good person to ask. I have a very good eye for stuff like that. Things like this drive me crazy. And every time I see this in the book, I'm like, how did the editor miss this? I would have seen this immediately. I don't ever miss stuff like this, okay? And it's one of those things, it's a peeve of mine. It's a peeve. I don't like when books do like repeat actions that the character is already doing. I hate that. And so every time it happened in this book, I noticed it and it pulled me out of the story, and it was really annoying. Okay, but the other inconsistency I'm talking about is this book is also very tonally inconsistent. And so it's like half of this book feels like a Hans Christian Andersen Little Mermaid retelling that was adapted and a little dumbed down for a group of 5th graders, and the other half of it feels like a you know, a regular YA book. And so that resulted in me feeling like kind of jerked around, where I feel like this book is like, it's a little juvenile, and then it's also, you know, like not a very good YA book either. And unfortunately, this was one of the reasons why I was on the fence about this book for so long, is because I was afraid that this author's take, anyway, I'm not going to hold all YA mermaid books. I'm not going to not read them or punish them or whatever just because I don't like this author's the way she did it. I felt like the way Sarah did it was a kind of middle grade-ish, childish, juvenile-ish kind of a way. And that's why I was afraid. I was afraid that there was no way you could have mermaids in a YA book without coming across as juvenile. And I still believe that there is a way to do this, but this book did not do this. The mermaid part of this book were really childish, you know? It's like it was something to pull out of a picture book for babies. I read picture books a lot, but you know what I mean. And the next thing I didn't like about this book was I did not like the ending. And I don't mean like the very, very ending, like with the epilogue, because again, I knew when I bought the book that the book was going to end that way. And I did remember as I was getting like pretty close to the end, I was like, oh, that's right. This is not going to go well. But I think if I didn't like Evie so much, which again, if I didn't like Evie, I would not have finished the book, just a fact. But if I had not liked Evie so much, I don't think the ending would have bothered me as much as it did. But I just kind of feel like this book was only ending that way because it had to end that way, because the author did a very unimaginative, in my opinion, retelling of The Little Mermaid. It felt like she took Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid and whipped it into some kind of origin story for the Sea Witch, because she was following the trajectory of that plot almost to a T, which not only made the story more predictable, but it also made it less satisfying, because it means like there was basically nothing happening in this book. It was just Evie and Nick and Iker and Annette hanging out and walking around and talking and holding hands. And I'm just like, what is this? This book. So this is like 340 something pages of a bunch of teenagers just hanging out and holding hands and talking. And that's not very interesting. And I kept waiting for something interesting to happen, which it did at the very, very ending. And then all of a sudden, Annette has an extreme personality change, and so does Iker. But again, because they were so suspect to begin with, because they were too perfect or whatever, like you see it coming, but it still comes out of nowhere, you know? And it's just like, again, that's another reason why I feel this book is kind of juvenile, because it's like, if you're writing this book for teenagers are smart enough. You don't have to spoon feed them. You know, I really don't think you have to spoon feed middle graders either. But I just felt like the author had these caricatures and was like painting by numbers, basically. Like, I guess it was supposed to be shocking, you know, like Annette's plot, you know, character arc was supposed to be shocking. That, okay, spoiler alert, Annette is Anna, okay? And I guess that was supposed to be shocking, but it's like, no, it's not shocking, Sarah, because it was really freaking obvious. Also, Iker, turning out that he was just kind of like, oh, let's have one last fling before I have to like marry a noble girl and settle down and be a man or whatever. Let me have one last fling with the fishmonger's daughter and act like I care about her. I mean, we know Iker doesn't really care about her, and so it's like when we get to the end and he's like all of a sudden kind of a jerk, it's like, surprise, twist. It's like, no, Sarah, that's not a twist. It was really freaking obvious that this was going to happen because you write like you were writing a book for freaking 9-year-olds or something. Like, this is not a good YA book. This is not good writing. This is not good storytelling, okay? Again, if this was a middle grade book, then I would forgive it if, for being super obvious, because I don't read a ton of middle grade, but it's fine. Okay, it's fine. They're children. It's fine. But when you're writing a YA book, you don't need to do that. So let's talk about the epilogue. Okay, so book is called Sea Witch. Again, spoiler alert. So we end the book with Evie becoming Ursula, basically, an octopus woman. And I thought the imagery for that was actually really, really cool. And again, as somebody who just loves The Little Mermaid, that loves Ursula so much, I was like, oh, that's really cool. However, it felt a little bit like it was encroaching on Disney's territory. And I guess it's okay, because I don't know, what Disney owns and what they don't own, like when it comes to like their property. So obviously they don't own Octopus Woman, because that is in this book. And also the epilogue was almost the scene when Ariel comes to Ursula's cavern. It was almost that scene of verbatim. She even said like the Ariel character, whose name I can't remember, it's not important. She was like, how am I going to get the prince to fall in love with me if I can't talk? And Evie was like, you have your pleasing form, you have this, you have that. And I'm like, hello? You have your looks, your pretty face, and don't underestimate the importance of body language. Like, she's basically saying that, but in a slightly different way. And it was a little uncomfortable. But again, I don't know what's allowed and what's not allowed. So obviously this was allowed, but it just felt like very unimaginative. Like Sarah Henning wasn't trying very hard to come up with her own story. She basically like chewed up, bits of The Little Mermaid and Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid. And, she basically chewed it up, stuffed her cheeks with it, and then vomited it out on her computer. And I'm like, this is extremely disgusting. But I just kind of feel like, could you have tried to use your imagination? Could you have tried to do something unique or original or something? But I did like parts of the ending. I did like the action. I did like some of the description. And I did like, the, what do you call it? The pentacle, the plot arc, the character arcs for Evie and Nick. I did like that. It wasn't what I wanted, but it's what you had to do based on how the story was going or whatever. And it was the only way it could end. And like I said, the title alone gives away the ending to this book. And it made me feel like I wasted my time. This book made me sad. And it didn't make me sad because of the way it ended. It made me sad because I wish I had not finished this book. I wish I had not read this book. I wish I had just listened to my gut when my gut told me that this book was going to be juvenile. Like, I felt sad for myself, if that makes sense. I'm like, how sad is my life that I had better options, but I read this book anyway? And this book made me feel old. Okay, I know you guys don't know how old I am. A couple people might know. I don't know who's watching this video, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not so old that I should feel old, but I am old enough that I'm getting a little sensitive. And this book made me feel old. And I read middle grade books and I read picture books, and I read a chapter book a couple years ago, and I had a good time. And none of those books made me feel old. This book made me feel old, and it made me want to go through my shelves and get rid of 90% of my YA books. And I don't like feeling that way, because there are definitely a lot of YA books that are like fun for everyone, and so you don't have to be a teenager to enjoy the book. This book made me feel like I couldn't enjoy this book like past the age of 12. and that it just made me feel old and sad for myself. It made me depressed. Okay, like I went and got a depressing poetry book to read just so I would feel normal again. And I'm like, I shouldn't have to do that. And I ended up binging like the entire 2 seasons that are available of the show Dead to Me on Netflix right now. I watched both of those seasons in like 3 days because I was just like, I need to watch something with people who are older than me. I need to not, I felt really old. And yeah, my birthday is in May and it's February and it's just a number that I don't like. And I'm just a little sensitive and I'm just freaking out. And I don't appreciate reading the book that makes me feel like I am too old to be reading this book. Because it's like, I am on the mindset that I can read whatever I want. I can read a picture book. I can read, like I said, a chapter book. I can read a middle grade book. I can read YA. I can read whatever the frick I want to read. Okay? And I do not appreciate their existing books that make me feel like there are books that I'm too old for. Needless to say, I'm unhauling this book, and needless to say, I'm not reading the sequel to this book because this book takes place, this is a sequel, because I thought if I liked this book, then I would want to read this one immediately. And like I said, I planned to still read this book until I got to the last chapter. And I don't want to read this book. I don't want anything to do with it. Anyway, I don't want to read the sequel, okay? Because I feel like I'm too old for these books. And it makes me really, really agitated and really, really sad. And I don't like feeling this way. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go through my YA section and get rid of all my YA books. I'm not going to get rid of all my mermaid books. But that's how that's how this book made me feel. And it left me feeling kind of sad for myself. Obviously, I have issues. But anyway, so in my reading wrap up, I will reference this video. I'm not going to talk about this book anymore because this book has made me think my life is more sad than it is. And I don't have a sad life. I actually have a pretty good life. I'm also, I'm the kind of reader that I like all kinds of retellings, okay? I like retellings that are unimaginative, and I like retellings that just completely retell the story. However, when it comes to origin stories for villains, I just want the villain to be bad. I just want them to be bad. Like, everybody keeps saying, oh, they're just misunderstood. No, I want them to be bad, okay? Like, I have Heartless and Ferris by Marissa Meyer, and so I hear that you get to see the villains, you become an actual villain. And so that's what I was hoping to get out of this book, which I think is what I said in my TBR video, that I was hoping that we actually get to see her becoming an evil sea witch. But no, we don't. She's just misunderstood, which is literally one of my most unfavorite things. I don't know if that's a word, but it's one of my least favorite things and retellings is taking the villain and just making them misunderstood. But that's all. Okay, I'm done talking about this book. I didn't like this book, but I'm not gonna change my rating because I just feel like I put myself in a box with my rating system, and I'm not gonna break the box for this book. It's not worth it. And I will continue to read YA books, and hopefully I will be less sensitive the next time I pick up a mermaid book. So that is all for this video. And hopefully it made sense. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.